Hello everyone and welcome to the very first Heatons Climate Action Festival. It's funded by Sustainable Living in the Heatons and Stockport Local. My name is Paul Lewis. I'm Chair of Sustainable Living in the Heatons, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the festival. The festival has taken a huge amount of effort and preparation to get us ready for today. And I'd like to make a special thank you to Mel Godfrey and Diana Scotcher, who's the secretary, without which none of this would have happened, and they have worked like absolute Trojans. So once again, thank you very much. A big round of applause, and we're good to go. And here we are. We are running this festival over the next 2 weekends, so today 12th, tomorrow the 13th, and next weekend 19th and 20th. And we have 12 different inspiring events, all free, covering biodiversity, science, travel, eco-houses, plastics, to name but a few. We have presentations, videos, quizzes and panels. We think we've got something for everyone. Now, can I just quickly, at this point, go over the housekeeping? Can I have the housekeeping slide up, please? This slide will appear at all the main events, and it's there just to show you and help you understand the house rules for webinars and to show how it's going to work. So as you'll have gathered, speakers and panelists can speak. The rest of you will be on mute. There's a Q&A button at the bottom, which if you hover over with your mouse, you'll see. And with that, you can ask questions, make points, and we'll try and get them out answered today. But if not, we'll get to you by the end of the day or even later on. Please, can you participate in all the polls? We love your feedback and your involvement. And there is also a chat box, which you'll also see at the bottom. And this is for commentary and to share ideas as the events are happening. After the webinar, the recordings will be uploaded to YouTube, and you'll be able to visit it on the SLH website, www.slheatons.org. So here we are. Can we pass on to the next slide, please? The SLH has been around for 10 years, looking at ways we can make the Heatons a better place to live, to work and play. We've organised lots of different events over that time, but more recently, some of us have become concerned that we're not addressing the big issues. Climate change is happening whether we like it or not, and at great pace. The likes of David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg have all raised their voices, expressing the urgency required. And don't make any mistakes, this affects us all. Yet despite the urgency, change is not happening fast enough. And we all worry that our leaders are not acting fast enough and not making big enough changes to solve the problem. This makes us all wonder what we can do to make a difference. What will the changes that we make a difference at all? What's the point? We recognise that change is very difficult, but change is necessary now more than ever. So we can either despair or do something about it. So we say, don't despair. Look at what you can do as individuals, as local businesses, and within our local community. We need to influence and make change happen. So at Sustainable Living in the Heatons, we thought, what can we do? We had a bit of a brainstorming session, as we do, and then we came up with, let's have a festival. because you know how much we love a festival in the Heatons. So we went ahead. We were supposed to have a physical event over at Priestnell School, but sadly when COVID hit, we thought we were going to have to cancel. So we then said, I know, we need to do something completely different. So we went for a Zoom webinar. Now, I don't know about you, but I thought, who the blazes has heard of Zoom before March? I hadn't, let alone a webinar. And here we are with a Zoom webinar, a festival online. And guess what? We also have our own YouTube channel, as I mentioned before. So please go back, pick up on any events you've missed, or rerun an event if it's really impressed you or you've enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed what you see, share it on social media. Tell your friends and neighbours. Let's get the word out there, because change needs to happen. So here we are, the inaugural Heatons Climate Action Festival in 2020. So what is it all about? Well, the festival is here to help ask the question, what more can I do to make a difference? And we are there to offer lots of usable and practical and fun answers that you can all take away with you. We also want to set up legacy events afterwards. And to do this, we need your feedback and we need your input. So please keep in touch and take part in polls and Q&As as they come along. Make the most of the festival. Go to as many events as you can. Ask questions. Be curious. But most of all, please have fun. So thank you. And without more ado, I'd like now to introduce you to a local resident with a professional interest in media and climate change podcasts. Her name is Hannah Warren, and she will now talk about the challenges in communicating climate change. Over to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So my name is Hannah Warren, and I've lived here in Heaton Moor for nearly 10 years. And I work in Media City UK in radio news for a very well-known broadcaster. And I was asked to take part in this festival because I've also recently pitched and produced a podcast, which is due to come out this October, about climate change and how we choose to live on this planet. So I'm not an environmental expert myself, but making the podcast means I've spoken to a wide range of real experts and speakers over the course of this year, 6 months or so, which has informed me about the issues at hand with climate change. I just wanted to tell you about a few things which I took away from that experience and from talking to those people, and also about the challenges of communicating climate change as I see it. When I say communicating climate change, I don't just mean broadcasters. I think it's a challenge for everyone to communicate messages to their friends and their family as well. From my perspective, I think one of the challenges is in the storytelling of climate change and making it feel relevant to people's everyday lives. Just to unpack that a little bit. For example, with COVID-19 and the pandemic, it's been an immediate threat to life and economies, and we've seen action has been swiftly taken by governments, businesses and individuals around the globe, and people are keen to follow every twist and turn of the story. But with climate change, it's a much slower burn threat, if you like, and it can seem far off in the future, something which will be a concern maybe for future generations, but not right now. By now, and rightly so, people have bills to worry about and jobs to think about, and their kids' education and immediate health concerns. I think climate change also feels far away on the other side of the globe, something that will affect perhaps Australia and Africa and India, but not so much the global north, perhaps. In fact, some people like the idea of our country being a few degrees warmer. And so part of the challenge, I think, for communicators and in fact everyone is portraying that it's also a threat on potentially a greater scale than COVID-19, on which you can't self-isolate, and that it's already affecting us, and we are on a trajectory where it's likely to get increasingly worse. So how could you do that? Well, we have seen droughts, floods and heat waves increasing in the UK. And this year we've had the heat wave here in April and record temperatures this summer enjoyed by many, including myself, because like everyone loves a sunny day, right? It's about recognising that with heat waves you also get these intense rains, downpours, which are becoming major flooding events much more frequently here in the UK. And we've seen it with flooding in our own area, in the Heatons and surrounding areas like Bridle and Didsbury. And when your own home is under threat from flooding, then perhaps the impacts of climate change start to feel more real. And people question, why is this happening? And why is this happening more frequently? The heat waves and flooding we've seen in the UK all have an impact on our harvests. And we feel the impact ourselves when we see bread prices rise, which is actually predicted here in the UK after this year's poor wheat harvest due to difficult weather conditions. So the challenge is connecting all of these things to climate change and the impact of our everyday choices, things like what we buy and eat and how we heat our homes, and recognising that our consumer choices really, really do matter. And I think the focus for communicating climate change, as much as educating people about the threat, also needs to be on the solutions, and that we know the solutions already. We don't need to invent something, we just need to make the changes that we talk about. And then there's also a danger of the public turning away from too much doom, especially in this current pandemic. The doom message in climate change is very strong, and I just think we all need some positivity, and that can come with making change in our own lives. So just to finish, I was asked to give 3 solutions we can all try, which I learned from the experts we spoke to in our forthcoming podcast. So they are: number 1, consider reducing your food waste. So a staggering amount is wasted. A third of food produced for human consumption is lost or wasted globally. That's something like over 1 billion tonnes per year. 1 billion. And in the UK, most of our food waste is from households, not supply chains. Carbon emissions from food are created in the growing, production, rearing, packing and transportation around many countries before it arrives on our shelves here in Britain. So there's something all of us can do there, eating up everything that's in our fridge or cupboard, eating leftovers for lunch the next day, and not overbuying in supermarkets or in restaurants. It then reduces demand and overproduction. The number 2 would be considering increasing the number of meals you eat, which is dairy-free or meat-free. And you don't need to stop eating things like beef, lamb, cheese, yogurt altogether to make a difference, but we are just eating way too much of it. So you could simply increase your fruit and vegetable intake and your pulses intake, or find dairy alternatives, and that would go a long way to helping. And then number 3, consider buying less. Most emissions come from the manufacturing of our products. So that's from getting the raw materials out of the ground in the first place. Iron ore to make metals for cars, or oil to make plastic for toys, for example. But if you do need to buy something, and make sure it's durable, increase its longevity, and perhaps even consider renting products like power drills or cars instead of owning them. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
That's great. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you for participating, and thanks for your input. 3 very simple things that we all can do, take away and put into our lives. Now, we're on to the first main event of the festival. We've finally got here after many months. One of the things I was going to say to you all was a little insight. How on earth did we come about and come up with this idea of this next event? And yet again, we were brainstorming and we said, do you know what? Why don't we bring together people in power and in the know, put them on a panel, and then get young Heatonians to fire questions at them that they know absolutely nothing about in advance? What could possibly go wrong? Well, here we are, my favourite event of the weekend, or certainly one of them. It's upon us, and I'll hand you over to Phil Corbell, who will chair the event. This is the Heatons Youth Climate Commission, and Phil, who's a friend, a long-time volunteer with Sustainable Living in the Heatons, will take us forward. Over to Phil.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for a great introduction. There's a slight bit of repetition now for the sake of folk that might be starting to view this after the event. My name is Phil Corbell. I'm one of the early members of Sustainable Living in the Heatons. My day job is to help run a thing called the Carbon Literacy Project, about communicating, training people in climate change action. I got into working in climate change because I'm a dad. It's really, really simple. I want a safe future for my amazing daughters and everyone else, but that was my spur. The idea of enabling young people to have a meaningful voice and to find out more about this existential threat is absolutely essential. It also plays into the rationale for the event itself, for the festival. If you're looking at this, you probably know you want to do something about climate change. So this is part of our rationale, to enable you to come away with ideas of things you can do. We need to inspire you and spark off interest, let you go and find out more and do stuff about it. That's why we're here. And to enable young people to feed into this. Our three young Heatonians will introduce themselves in a minute, Hannah, Willem and Connie, but we're also lucky enough to have 4 witnesses. This is a commission, so we have witnesses, and standing by to field questions from our commissioners, Hannah, Willem and Connie, are the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, local councillor Colin Foster, who's also the council's lead councillor for family services and education. We've got a bona fide boffin, Sarah Bridle, Professor Sarah Bridle from the University of Manchester, who, when she's not looking at stars as a cosmologist, is doing extraordinary work unwrapping the carbon footprint of food. And finally, an extraordinary young activist, Emma Greenwood, will talk about her experience as a young activist. For everyone but Andy, if you're watching this and want to pose questions to Colin, Emma or Sarah, please put questions up on chat and we'll deal with them at the end. But if you have a question for Andy, we'll get them to Andy before he leaves us. So a bit more about our commissioners. If we could, each of our commissioners could just briefly introduce yourselves, tell us who you are and why you've agreed to use valuable weekend time in this event. Hannah, tell us a bit more about yourself, please.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Hannah and I'm a student in the local area. I'm 15 years old, and especially since coming to high school, I've developed a passion for raising awareness and taking climate action. So far this has included things like going to the school strike the climate strikes from school, and talking at Extinction Rebellion Northern last year as a youth voice. But I would say that the main thing that I'm passionate about is helping individuals to make simple changes to their lives that can then have a massive impact on our climate and just our planet in general. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here today and I can't wait to talk to everyone.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Willem, if you could tell us a bit more about yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Willem, I'm 18 and I'm a student from the local area. Same reasons as Hannah, I mainly sort of got into the climate activist zone through the school strikes from the very beginning, actually. And again, similarly, I'm more focused on kind of helping people make small changes rather than completely revolutionize their lives, and kind of make people think how little changes can make big differences, rather than then thinking this is a massive existential threat, I'm going to have to change everything that I do in my life. when really a lot of the solutions are very simple and personally orientated. And yeah, very excited to be here today and to talk to everyone, and I'm excited to get going.
In a second, but first, Connie, tell us a bit more about yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Connie. I'm a young person in the local area, and I would say I've probably become passionate in these kinds of issues through being involved in projects like the GMYCA and GM Goes Green, and I'm really passionate about young people's voices on climate change and climate action.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, the three of you. So without further ado, scratching his head thinking if there's anything I've missed, let's get to our first witness. And if ever there was a cliche about this person needs no further introduction, I think it's great that we've got the Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham as our first witness for the Heatons Youth Climate Commission. What we're going to do is have each of our young people pose a question, and if there's still more time in this section, we'll take it out for further questions and maybe input from our viewers as well. So Andy, welcome. Really good to have you here. And let's get this straight as well. On the 21st of September, the Greater Manchester Green Summit starts. Let's get that bit done. And there's a special flavour to this year's summit, Andy.
Yes, thanks, Phil. It's great to be with everybody, and amazing to see Hannah, Willem and Connie giving up their Saturday to, well, that says it all, that you're so committed. But actually, to be honest, I kind of going with the theme of this session, asked young people to lead the agenda setting, Phil, for this year's summit. We did give young people the stage at the start of the summit in 2019, but we wanted to go one further this year. So you're about to hear from Emma. There's been a huge effort to really engage young people across Greater Manchester. So it's exciting. It's what is it, 2 weeks' time? And just so everyone knows, I was asked to join the UK Mayors and Regions COP committee by the government. We had our first meeting yesterday. So I referenced the summit, and it's been agreed that the GM Green Summit 2020 and then 21 will both feed directly into COP in Glasgow in November next year. So, you know, this is how we really cascade it, isn't it? This commission today needs to feed into our Green Summit, which then, you know, so I hope people feel connected to policy at the highest level. So, yeah, fantastic to be with everyone today.
Great. Andy, thank you for the scene setter. Hannah, you have the first question.
Yeah, so I absolutely love riding my bike. It's my favourite way to get around. But at the moment, unfortunately, it's just not safe for me to be able to cycle to places like Manchester or even to Stockport because, yeah, it's just the cycle lanes aren't really set up for that. So I was wondering, what are your plans to increase sustainable ways to get around Manchester safely, particularly by walking or biking? So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So we have huge ambitions in this area. I mean, I can't claim to be as active a cyclist as yourself, but I have just started cycling to Manchester from home in Lee, which I can assure you is a very long journey. I've done it twice now, there and back, and I know exactly what you're describing because there's some brilliant bits, and then all of a sudden you hit a really bad bit. And so I've told Mr. Boardman, our cycling and walking commissioner, that he's going to do the journey with me in 2 weeks' time. So he can take notes about what needs to change. Because where I live, coming west on the East Lancs Road, it could be a fantastic kind of funnel really of people if the cycling provision was good all the way in, but it isn't. And so we're going to do something about that. But more broadly, you know, when I came in as mayor, I gave Chris a budget of £160 million. Everyone raised a few eyebrows at the time that I said cycling and walking was our top transport priority, but it is. And we've developed a plan for what we call the B network, and schemes keep being put through. I think, you know, I understand people might be frustrated at the pace of delivery, but obviously we've got to get them right, because there's no point, you know, we've seen in the past, haven't we, cycling provision where, you know, we spend money on lines on the road or stuff that doesn't actually deliver the change, the behaviour change that we need. And the behaviour change is that quality segregated provision. And let's also think about walking as well, because it's not the sort of poor relation here. You know, we want to support the government's move to ban pavement parking, because we think that is a big deterrent to people getting out and about. You also might have seen, Hannah, some of the temporary measures that we're putting in. So the councils have been putting in some of the temporary emergency active travel measures to get people like me who've decided to make a change in this particular moment. But then lastly, you ask how can people get around sustainably? I think one of the biggest things I can do for everyone as mayor is create what I call a London-style integrated public transport system in Greater Manchester. So what I have in mind, and I think this could be done certainly within a 3 to 5 year time frame, I think we could look at an all-electric Metrolink and bus fleet. Effectively, Metrolink becomes the whole thing, you know, all in the same livery, all run on renewable energy. Metrolink is largely run on renewable energy, and that's a really good Greater Manchester success story that we don't shout about enough. But imagine if we applied that completely as well to the bus system as well. And when I say London style, what I mean is there's a cap on what you can spend in any given day, no matter how many buses you take or how many trams you take. That's what they've got in London, and it makes public transport much more affordable and a better option than the car. And I would say we desperately need that here. And that's what I'm working towards.
Definitely, I totally agree with what you're saying there. Just one small follow-up question would be, how are you going to encourage people to use these new schemes and systems that you're putting in place?
Well, obviously, I mean, it is about encouraging the right behaviours, isn't it, as early as you can. So I think you're just a little too young to benefit yet, Hannah, but I have created a free bus pass for all 16 to 18s in Greater Manchester called the R Pass. And that's obviously to help people financially, of course, but and connect people to opportunities. But it is also to say public transport should be your first port of call. And I hope, well, I actually expect your generation probably will be much less likely to own a car than those that have gone before you. So that's one thing that we're doing. But obviously, the safer cycling provision is another that we're encouraging. We've recently put some new ticketing options in on Metrolink. So for the older members of this kind of discussion this afternoon, I'm thinking of Mr. Corbell here, obviously. He'll remember something called the Clipper card in Greater Manchester. Do you remember that, Phil? We've just introduced a new thing called Clipper on Metrolink, which is rather than a weekly or a monthly, it's a ticket that allows you to take your journeys whenever you want them, to try and incentivise public transport travel. So we're constantly thinking of things that we might be able to do. And we increasingly want rail to come as part of our plan, so that eventually we have a bus, tram and train integrated system like London. So that's where we're trying to get to, you know, just make it so much easier for people to use public transport.
Awesome.
Thank you, Andy. Our next commissioner is Willem. He's got a question for you.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you personally for the R Pass. It has been very, very useful in my life. Having recently run out, it's hard to pay for the buses now. But so my question is, I'm very passionate about the power of protest within young people and how change can sort of be driven through young people and through our own initiatives, like quite independently. So I just sort of wanted to ask like quite a general question about your attitude towards like youth protest and perhaps the differences that you might see between something like the school strikes, which are completely youth-led, and things like Extinction Rebellion, because obviously we had the Northern Rebellion on Deansgate this time last year. So I just wanted to kind of ask you to sort of, if you have any, sort of gauge the differences in your attitudes between the two.
Yeah, it's a really sort of thoughtful question, Willem. So I always supported the school strikes. I mean, there were some politicians who weren't, but I always did. I mean, I think it's an incredible part of your education to understand how to use your voice and to make your point. And Manchester, let's be honest, is a city of protest, isn't it? If you go back to Peterloo and trade union movement and the suffragettes, you know, that has been in the DNA of the city for a long time. And, you know, we always very much protect people's right to protest. My experience of going to the school strikes, because I went twice. Second time particularly, I can't remember. Somebody will know her name. A young activist. I mean, she really put me on the spot, and I think I probably didn't have good enough answers to give her. But it was brilliant. I mean, it's just undeniable. The power of it is undeniable, even though it's rightly challenging. The fact that it is just young people taking over the city and demanding change, there's just something undeniably powerful about it. And I've actually loved attending, even though it was challenging. I've loved attending those events. I'll be honest with you. I have more kind of doubts at times about some of the Extinction Rebellion protests. So first I ever came across them was when they came to the Lowry at the Green Summit 2019. I'd never, if I'm honest, heard of them before. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to kind of make a point. Now, we were having a big discussion. The point was we were having a democratic discussion. So I just said, well, come to the stage and take the microphone, and they did, but they were going to kind of come and sort of disrupt the event, which I personally wouldn't have thought was the right way to go about discussing things at a Green Summit. Anyway, but let's leave that one to one side. The one that I always sort of stuck in my mind was when they disrupted the tube in London. Public transport, people going to work. Is that going to win people to the cause? Because I personally think the way the climate agenda will really start to kind of make strides is when it is about delivering on the things that people want to see, as well as progress towards zero carbon. So better public transport. If you can start to align those things, that better public transport is the route to zero carbon, or lower energy bills because your home's been retrofitted, is that you've got to kind of create I think an agenda here that actually shows people that making progress towards zero carbon improves their lives. And I think sort of going at it, sort of making their lives more difficult, particularly when they are doing the right thing by using public transport. Anyway, that's a personal view, and I apologise if anyone on the call sort of feels that's controversial. But I do think these tactics need to be carefully considered. The school strikes for me are just absolutely the way to go. Extinction Rebellion, I find, really divides the Greater Manchester public, actually, and I got very criticised from the sort of, why have you allowed that protest? And we always do, as I said, because we're a city of protest. But I was heavily criticised from people saying you shouldn't have allowed it, this is disrupting us. And so the whole issue becomes divisive. And we can't afford for climate to become divisive. It's got to be unifying. As someone said at the start, it's got to be everybody pulling in the same direction. And I think XR just needs, I would say, to think a little about that.
Thanks, Andy. Obviously, if you're watching this, the Q&A chat button function is the place to get your comments in if you'd like to feedback on what Andy's saying at the moment. Finally, from amongst our commissioners, Connie, you've got a question for the Mayor.
So I think that green spaces are a really important aspect for our communities and I think for creating a greener future for Manchester. However, I personally would say that I think it's something we could do a lot better on in Manchester in terms of green spaces. And so I just wanted to ask, how do you plan to incorporate more green spaces into urban areas in Manchester?
Yeah, thanks, Connie. I think you're right, we need to do better. I think if you look at the 10 boroughs, but particularly as you get close to the city centre, we're not the greenest city at all, really. In terms of parks, we're actually quite under-provided for. And I think everyone has sort of felt the benefit of being out and about in green space, haven't they? And that's one of the things I think that has been a positive of the strange and difficult time that we've been living through. So we are trying to do something. We recently got some funding from the government to clean up brownfield land, and the biggest allocation went to Manchester City Council to clean up parts of the Mayfield site in city centre Manchester. But you may have read that the City Council are going to create the first major park in city centre Manchester in, I think, 100 years actually, on that site, using the money that we secured. So I think that's a start, if I could put it that way. We've supported City of Trees and the plan to plant 3 million trees across Greater Manchester, one for every resident. And And we've got a big, difficult thing coming soon, which is the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. And I'm sure there'll be people on this call will say, oh, no, not that again. And in many ways, I feel the same, oh, no, not that again. But strange as it sounds, because obviously this is a planning framework, a framework that dictates where planning will go in the next 20 to 30 years. If we don't have a plan, the green belt will be more at risk from developers, because they'll be able to play one council off against another. So we're doing that. But also, as part of the plan, we will be able to give better protection to some of our existing green belt. But also, as an aside, we'll introduce a 2028 requirement on planning permission for zero carbon buildings in Greater Manchester. So no building will get planning permission after that date if it's not zero carbon. So we are doing what we can to improve the natural environment. I mean, I think there's definitely much more to be done. I mean, there are some other schemes I could mention. We are doing some stuff on our mosses and in our peatland areas, but I think I would like to see us go much further than where we currently are. Make us a much greener city region, visibly, than we currently are.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. There'll be a lot more on that at a Greater Manchester level in the Greater Manchester Green Summit, starting 21st of September. Registration's open for that, by the way, already.
Phil, I can see someone in the chat, Mel, saying, about a message for the Green Summit.
Indeed.
Absolutely. If you agree what your message is, and I will make sure that it gets a proper bit of airtime at the Green Summit. So make sure you do communicate to me after today what you want. Well,
it's funny you should say that, Andy, because we conclude the festival Sunday week at 5 o'clock, where our commission will feed back their recommendations as a result of what they've heard today and throughout the festival. Someone called Navendu Mishra, our Stockport MP, is going to be hearing some of that. So part of that message will come back to you. Connie is involved in the Greater Manchester Youth Council as well, in helping advise on the summit too. So what we're pioneering here, you'll be hearing more of. Those two key subjects around travel and green space are also are on the programme for this festival as well. I'd love to carry on talking with you, Andy, but we've got 3 other witnesses that we have to spend time with. So I think, commissioners, if that's all right with you, we'll let the mayor go home. He's at home to leave us now, and we'll crack on with the rest of the witnesses. If that's
thanks,
okay.
Phil. And just to say to Hannah, Connie, Willem, fantastic questions, and as I say, all power to your elbow, and keep the protest going, Willem. It's definitely change is coming as a result of it, and I think I just one last, if I could, Phil, very quick reflection. I absolutely believe that your generation is going to correct the mess that my generation of politicians has made of everything. I have great faith in your generation in so many ways, in terms of the way you see the world, and perhaps a positive thought in this sort of tough time we're living through. I do think in 100 years' time, when the Heatons Sustainable Living Festival is taking place in 2/1/20, I personally believe that people at that point will look back at the pandemic as the moment when there was major acceleration towards a zero carbon society. We're going to have to kind of get the economy going coming out of this. But from my perspective, it's all going to be about clean air zone, public transport I was talking about, retrofitting properties, green construction, green energy. It's going to be a green recovery, I think, and I think we're going to accelerate progress coming out of this. So let's hope anyway, and let's make sure that happens. But Phil, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in and supported it.
Thank you, Andy, and good luck with the summit and all your other efforts. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Andy.
Phil.
Good to have you there. This almost seems like planning, and of course it is, that we would like to move from the Greater Manchester picture to the Stockport picture. And to that end, our next witness is Councillor Colin Foster, who's the lead councillor for Stockport Council on Family Services and Education. And Heatonians, most of you will know Colin. He's a long-standing local councillor as well. So following, and what we're going to do with questions hereafter is save them for the end of the entire session, if that's all right, but do keep them coming. There's some good questions coming in. Use the Q&A button at the bottom there. So Hannah, you've got a question for Colin.
Okay, so I think that although climate change is entering our curriculum, definitely, we're still often learning about the physical side, and we're not really learning how we ourselves can make a change. So my question is, how are you planning to shift climate education from a science lesson to teaching us how to take action? And hopefully starting this from primary education, because we need to start early.
Colin.
Okay, as somebody whose background is in geography, in teaching over many years, not unaware, to say the least, about climate change. In fact, I was probably involved with it many years ago with its initial implications. How can we impact on education? Last year, through a head teacher who's in Stockport, we had a session at Manchester University when 20 local schools, well, 20 schools across Stockport gave presentations about how they were tackling individual aspects of climate change and the environment. And I think it's starting at primary level, it is very much looking in the immediate environment, how you relate to that. If you have a look at a number of our primary schools within the Heatons, for example, they have become forest schools. So they're actually having outdoor education when the weather permits, obviously, and developing that. Now, at a secondary level, it shouldn't all be science-based. There should be elements of that happening in a number of subjects. In my former discipline, I was involved with geography. There should be elements in that is being within the curriculum, because that interface between human beings and the environment has gone on for, ever since there were human beings. And literally, the way in which humans have altered our landscape is all around us. You see that, and so that the curriculum should actually, well, does, but it's the way it's taught, because obviously there's two separate things. There's the framework and then how teachers actually use materials in relation to that. As far as I'm aware, that is actually going on in a number of schools, but I agree with you, there needs to be a major thrust in relation to this. One of the difficulties is that the national curriculum is quite restricted in a number of fronts. But it is important that we encourage all schools in Stockport and in the Heatons in particular that are taking up looking at this in a far more holistic point of view, rather than in the very narrow approach within science, because it infiltrates everything. It infiltrates whether you are inspired by the landscape, inspired by your immediate environment, in terms of English. You could be doing stuff in maths of actually what are the actual impacts in terms of doing calculations of this. There's so many different things across the piece that this should come in. So in response to your question, I think there's plenty of opportunities and we should be responding to that. And I think you'll find most schools are, but it needs more coordination. The difficulty is within any area, there's quite a number of schools are completely independent now through what are called academies, and trying to influence them is not as easy as it used to be in former years. But it is being taken forward and we will take it forward.
Thank you very much, Colin. Willem, you're the next commissioner asking a question.
Hello. So obviously you've been involved in the Stockport Climate Action Now plan. So my question's kind of double-sided almost. So first of all, obviously, it's garnered a bit of criticism from the Green Party within Stockport. Regarding sort of like targets and deadlines. So first of all, I just want to ask how you would address that, and what sort of targets the plan does actually want to like reach, and within what time frame. And also on the flip side of that, how would you say you feel like, what would you say you feel the most proud of within the plan, and what initiatives would you say that you're most excited about?
Okay, the Stockport Climate Action now arose from a resolution that was passed through council nearly 2 years ago, and there was a major discussion last year through the annual conversation that takes place through the Stockport Youth Parliament. Unfortunately, there was no conversation this year, and even the discussions on the Stockport Health Emergency, sorry, not health, the Stockport Climate Emergency was all held back for 6 months because of the pandemic. I can tell you that this coming Thursday, the plan is actually being presented to council for the next stage forward, and within that there are a whole series of initiatives, and obviously as we proceed there will be a number of others, and developing targets in relation to that will be a part of that particular process. We literally are about at least 6 months behind consequent to the I have to say that this is not a political issue in council, because we actually have a group of councillors from all parties that are actually dealing with this, and this has been specifically set up to actually move this forward. Things I'm proud of in it, well, one of the big ones is the how we're actually developing, not as much as I would have liked to have done, but we are developing tree replacement. There's a programme of over 2,500 trees in the next few years. There's going to be 80,000 whips planted in various open spaces over the next 10 years. There's going to be an orchard for each particular ward. There is one already in existence in Heatons South on the Merseyvale Nature Park. That was done by local community group, building on what had been established originally that was falling into disuse basically. There's going to be a whole series of things like that. We've already got one of our little green meadows has started, in that if you go along Green Lane, you'll see that a local resident working alongside the council has actually set up a meadow there. We do need to, for the wildflowers, we do need to actually move that along far more. But there are some very big things that are needed. For example, the Metrolink coming to Stockport, we are crying out for that. As somebody who used to work in Manchester Town Centre, for many, many years, I was actually travelling on public transport, and literally having Metrolink, as some of you may be aware, has actually been, the East District Metrolink has significantly altered the way in which our patterns of travelling has happened. Unfortunately, on the other side, on the easterly side of the Heatons, with the railway, that is not provided as good a source of movement as we would like, albeit that the number of people using Heaton Chapel Station, unless I'm mistaken, has almost doubled in the space of 20 years. It's a huge, but it needs more services use that. But of course, we've got one of the best bus services in the almost in the country with the 192, and that is a superb service that literally, in terms of moving into the town centre, city centre, is extremely useful. One of our difficulties is the east-west movement. If you take the 42, for example, Is that a good service? Not particularly. Disbury Road, not too bad, but literally people's access to public transport is a critical element. And Andy's talking about having an integrated system is reliant on bus services actually linking in with trains. They don't need to link too much with Metrolink because a 6 or 12 minute service is damn good. So we need a good integrated system on that. And I'm proud of the fact that Andy announced less than 12 months ago that Stockport will be linked up to the Metrolink system. So that is a massive change, and it's really, we need a lot more of that. I could go on. I've already gone on.
I wish there was time, Colin. I wish there was time.
But I think you're getting to get there. There's a lot, but there is a huge amount to be done. And we obviously have got a number of projects in the Heatons under the walk cycle monies. There's a couple of big ones that are actually on the way now. We're just waiting for the formal money to be signed off, and those can begin.
Fantastic, and we could spend much more time on that. Indeed, I hope with sustainable living in the Heatons we might be able to delve into the detail of the plan as the detail emerges. Connie, you've got a question for Colin.
I wanted to ask, how do you think young people's voices could be involved more in Stockport's decisions around climate action? And then just to kind of add on to what Willem asked, were you happy with the amount of young people voice in the plan you mentioned?
One of my disappointments in Stockport is that we've had a structure in place for young people, and that has, young people's voice, and that has got less and less. But in the last 2 years, the Stockport Youth Parliament has started to be a greater role for that to be played, and certainly there is very much now wanting to involve young people on a whole series of fronts. Climate obviously being the single largest one, and my colleague who has responsibility for inclusive communities of actually trying to involve young people's groups in those particular processes. It would be really great through such as our activities today if groups of young people could come together in the Heatons so that we could actually be discussing this. As it currently exists, it's a void, and as far as I'm concerned, the more we can do to support that, I will do so. As I say, we're on a journey at the moment. We from a low level, but moving very much forward.
I think that Connie, Connie, Willem, and Hannah, sounds like an open invitation, don't you reckon? Let's take it up. Colin, thank you very much for answering the questions so thoroughly. We will have hopefully an opportunity at the end of this session to put some of the questions to some of the witnesses that are coming from the viewers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Sarah Bridle. Perhaps more at home or formerly the sort of person attached to a large telescope at Jodrell Bank and it's like looking at stars. She's a cosmologist. But of recent times, she's set up an extraordinary project called Take a Bite Out of Climate Change, and her focus has been on the climate impact of what we eat, which obviously was alluded to previously. And Sarah is joining us now. The first question from our first commissioner, Hannah.
Hi, so I think quite often when we're talking about how we can change our lives in order to make our lives more eco-friendly, something that comes up is switching to either a vegetarian or vegan diet. But this can obviously seem like quite a daunting thing to ask someone to do. So I was wondering what simpler swaps can be made that have the biggest impacts, and how can consumers use their powers wisely in order to decrease climate change?
Brilliant. That's a great question. Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's some great tips already about food choices earlier on, and I definitely would back those up about it being about frequency of different choices, as much as, you know, you don't need to completely cut everything out that might have a large climate impact and never have anything that's meat, for example. But I think another very simple thing is actually to look at quantity as well. So for some people, maybe, you know, halving the amount of beef in a spaghetti bolognese, and maybe if they can afford it, buying better quality, is actually, that's basically going to halve the climate impact of your dinner. If you halve the amount of beef in your portion, because that does tend to dominate in that particular recipe, but also bulking that out and adding more nutrition and flavour with different things like pulses and vegetables, obviously always a good thing. So I think quantity is definitely one thing, and then I think the other thing is then, yeah, sometimes there's swaps that you can make. For example, people are often surprised at, like, you look at a cup of coffee, like a latte and an Americano, and if actually the latte is made almost entirely of milk, you're basically drinking a cup of milk, then that's very different to having an Americano with, you know, if there's basically a tablespoon of milk in there, you've just used up a large fraction of your budget if you're going to have a large latte every morning. So I think there's people get interested in those kind of swaps, and obviously switching from ruminant meat to lower impact meats like chicken or obviously all the pulses and things is another thing that people sort of latch onto as an easier way to look at things. I would also say about air freighting. So people also look at food miles, talk about local food. I was quite surprised when I looked into this, because you think, oh gosh, you know, there's a brilliant book you might have come across called How Bad Are Bananas by Mike Berners-Lee, and actually the updated edition came out last week. Definitely check that out. Really up-to-date numbers in there. And you know, basically the answer is bananas are not that bad, because although they've come a long way, if you're transporting something by ship, it causes 100 times less climate impact than transporting the same weight of food by air. So actually, as consumers, we don't know which things have come by air, which things have come by ship. So if you're looking for things that are perishable, like berries, green beans, asparagus, that kind of thing, they tend to come by air. But if you're looking at bananas, oranges, apples, things that can come by ship, soybeans, you know, things that come by ship are basically not a big problem. I feel like there's a different part to your question which I've now forgotten. Can you remind me?
Yeah, I was just talking about, like, consumers using their power wisely. And
oh yes, yeah, that's a great question. So that takes me back to this point about not always knowing as a consumer which foods have caused the most climate impact. And although we can draw broad categories like that, for example, if you had dairy beef that came from a dairy herd, as opposed to beef that came from a dedicated beef herd, that would cause about half the emissions, just because you end up sharing out the climate impact between the meat and the dairy. But as a consumer, you don't know that. So I really think we need labelling on all food packets, and we need that to be mandatory, because we don't want just some packets and not others. And I think the path to making something like that mandatory is to support food producers who do put the labels on. And so that would be like, I think that's a really important step towards us actually having, you know, a proper inventory of what's really the facts in this.
Definitely.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Willem, you're our next commissioner with a question for Sarah.
Hello. This academic year before the pandemic took hold, well, actually it was more last academic year actually, I was very involved in creating more accessible vegan and vegetarian options at my college, because they were pretty abysmal, if I'm being honest, throughout my first year. So I was just wondering what your perspective was, or if you kind of have any ideas or solutions about how student-led efforts can be used to kind of create more initiatives, or just more vegetarian and vegan options within university campuses, as I'm a uni student myself, to just sort of kind of, like Hannah said, make little changes that can go a long way in the long term.
Yeah, that's gosh, great question. Yes, I think that it's there's, as been said lots of times now, I really think that, I mean, you know, basically food is being provided, and then you are the ones that are choosing which things you're going to buy. So you basically have all the power there is, really, because if everyone stops buying one of the options. But I suppose if you're thinking about a smaller group of students, what can that smaller group do? I mean, one thing that I've been we're discussing with some caterers is the idea of maybe putting labels on the different food options. If you can estimate roughly what the greenhouse gas emissions are for each of the options, and then make that visible, maybe with like just a diagram showing, you know, the height, the size of that, or maybe actually blowing up balloons and like showing, you know, this is this number of balloons worth of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. But I don't know, I suppose you'd have to cooperate with the caterers to do that, or could you just go and like put leaflets out saying, you know, this is the difference between these different meal options, and maybe the caterers might follow suit. So I think there's some nice tools out there now where you can actually estimate the greenhouse gas emissions of different options, even very roughly. So that might be one way forward. But there's lots of other things that have been looked at in catering situations, which again might require the cooperation of the caterers. But on the other hand, if there's simpler things, then they might consider it. And it's about food placement. So there was a great paper that came out a couple of weeks ago, that if they have the vegan meal more than 1.5 meters away from the meat meal, then that makes a, like, I think it was 30% difference in terms of uptake. So there's stuff about sort of giving people information. That's one sort of route. Another way is to look at the food environment, and I guess you're sort of alluding to that there. And then another thing is really sort of looking at waste, which was mentioned, very important topic earlier. And so maybe, you know, again, a sort of campaign about advertising that information, and maybe even a campaign of measuring plate waste, and you know, even looking at what's going in there, and maybe using that to inform the caterers, and advertising that back to people, saying, you know, last week we had this much weight of plate waste, and this week it's this much. I don't know how much you want to get your hands dirty, but that's some thoughts.
Great. Thank you very much indeed for that, Willem. And our last question from our commissioners is from Connie.
Hi. So obviously taking the steps to reduce the carbon footprint of your diet, as Willem and Hannah said, is very important. But I think one of the first things that we need to understand is we need to, how would you suggest we can educate young people, especially young people like primary school age, on the impact of their diet, the carbon footprint of their diet, and how that impacts the environment? Because I think a lot of the time people really just aren't aware of quite how big of a difference even just having beef or chicken can make.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think that there are things you can do with all ages. I mean, one of the things that we've done is made some flashcards which have got different, you know, numbers on them, showing like, if you have this portion of beef, this like 100 grams of beef, that's equivalent amount of climate change effect as driving a car for 30 minutes. Or if you have this portion of lentils, same size, then it would be like more like one or 2 minutes, depending on how you cook them. So sort of getting the numbers into games. I quite like games. So we've made a game you can do on the computer where you have to click on the lowest, medium and highest impact foods. And that's kind of, people start doing games like that without really thinking why they're doing them, and then as they go on they start learning really quickly which are the highest and lowest impacts. So I'm all for games, and I think you can do a lot of those things with certainly down, you know, into the higher years of primary school. It's probably possible to make even simpler versions of those things that would work in lower years. And yeah, I think that, yeah, I think bringing that into eco groups, for example, is a fun way of doing it. And I really think, actually, I'm not sure that researchers like myself are really the people best placed to know what's going to work in a school. And so I'd love to see a project where maybe there's a collaboration between researchers and maybe the eco groups in schools, or maybe broader, where we've got some information, but probably the eco groups, for example, might be the best placed groups to actually, you know, come up with what those interventions are, what those things are that they're going to maybe show to the rest of the school. And maybe even, quite exciting idea, I think, to do a kind of experiment with that. So to start thinking about, how do we learn, how does science work, and how do we do that, and maybe doing like a homework in years 1, 3 and 5 on you know, on maybe doing some piece of information, watching some videos you made or whatever, and then maybe seeing, does that affect their canteen buying habits compared to years 2, 4 and 6 or whatever. So starting to sort of think about, how do we do an experiment here? If it's ethical, I'm not quite sure.
Sounds like an opening for a nice big project there. Is that okay, Connie? You're going to get your first academic gig here by the sound of it. That's great.
That'd be amazing. I'd love to help.
So thank you very much, Sarah, and so much more to talk about on that front. And we'll be talking more about food waste also in the festival as well. And we will just about have time at the end of this session to have a few questions from the floor, as it were, as well. So Sarah Bridle, thank you very much. The book is, quick plug for the book, Sarah.
I muted myself. Yeah, so Food and Climate Change Without the Hot Air. It's a free ebook on Amazon thanks to funding from the University of Manchester. It's got lots of numbers and that sort of thing that I just talked about.
There you go. Thank you. We had to have the book plug. It was obligatory. Thank you very much, Sarah Bridle. Our next witness is Emma Greenwood. She's Youth MP for Bury, but also is a wide-ranging activist, including things like climate change and the school strikes. So we'll get straight on, as time's against us. And Hannah's got the first question for you, Emma.
Yeah, so first of all, like, massive inspiration, obviously, but you've organised and participated in lots of amazing initiatives across Bury, and I was wondering, which ones do you think we could implement here in Stockport or the Heatons that could have like the greatest effect on climate change reducing?
No, thank you. That's an amazing question. There's so much that can be done, and I think especially in Bury, the biggest one we've done is initiate a climate action group, which is linked to the Friends of the Earth network. It's quite a new thing, so it was only set up at the start of this year, and with coronavirus and everything, it was kind of like everything, it's been knocked for 10. But getting the community together, especially like everyone in the community, so all ages, races, genders, and that sort of sense of unity and collective action to try and tackle it, we found was an amazing way to find a wide range of solutions to problems that maybe kind of you wouldn't think of if you were really inside the environment networks. Sometimes the environment network can be quite a bubble, so to kind of go outside of that and get ideas from people who aren't necessarily plugged into it, the kind of the things you come up with and the ideas that you wouldn't have thought of yourself are amazing. And from that we've kind of come up with a lot of ideas of what we can do in Bury to work with the local council to kind of use the limited money that councils have to kind of make the most effective change.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. That's great. Our next question is from Commissioner Willem. We'll give you a full title now.
Thank you. Hello. So my main question is just sort of, where do you see, like, in what direction do you hope to see the school strikes going in? Obviously, they've had to be put on hold, just like everything else with the current COVID situation. But also, like, where do you want and like where do you see kind of the youth movement going? Like, once you sort of might have reached your goals with this, might be many years down the line, you might not class as youth anymore. But obviously, if you're still involved with it, how do you sort of want this to be projected onto the future and maybe to the like younger generations as well?
Definitely, that's again a great question. I think before coronavirus, with the kind of youth strike movement had just grown so quickly. So it started in February of 2019, and just kind of like for the entire of 2019, it was a whirlwind of positive action and positive media coverage, because like prior to 2019, it just wasn't in mainstream media. And I think it was just a correlation of lots of environmental groups picking up momentum that managed to help push for this change. So I think in a way lockdown might have been a positive thing, because it's like allowed a lot of environmental groups to actually take a pause, breathe and think about what is the most effective way to go forward. And the youth strike movement was never meant to be a long-term solution, because strikes only have so much momentum. Like, you can't keep striking and expect it to have the same momentum it did at the start. So we're constantly re-evaluating what we're doing, and kind of all youth strikes are as a kind of a network is aiming to give a voice to the scientists. We're aiming to uplift them and try and get people to notice them and trust them. So we're always re-evaluating what is the best solution to do that, what's the most efficient one, and it's something that kind of internally on a UK-wide level, on a worldwide level, we're evaluating as well, because who knows when coronavirus will end, and school strikes at the moment obviously aren't a way we could do that safely. So that's something that's kind of ongoing at the moment. But on a longer term level, sort of in the future, I hope that we can use this as a way to show that everybody's voice has so much power, because I think obviously we've shown that age is not a limitation, but I think we need to do that with so many other areas. And to make politics an accessible and inclusive place, because at the moment I would say it isn't, whether that comes to race, kind of education, because there is no political education in school. So it's very much up to an individual to become engaged in that, and that shouldn't be a barrier that's there. And so I hope in the future that it isn't just seen as a youth strike movement that was pushing for climate justice. It was pushing for overall change systemically and culturally and societally about how people feel empowered and how people feel their voice has a platform and can therefore be used for positive change. And so, yeah, there's so much that can come from this, and I really hope that the youth strike movement has helped to kind of propel that forward and has helped to start maybe a movement of becoming more inclusive and allowing people to use the voice.
Thank you very much indeed. And that blends beautifully, as if planned, yet again, into a question from Connie. Yes.
My question is, what would your advice be for young people who would like to get involved in climate activism like you have, and how should they get started?
That's a perfect question. That's one of my favourite questions to answer because there's just so much to say. When I first got involved in the climate strikes, basically from seeing it on Facebook, and prior to that I'd felt quite powerless in terms of what I could do. I was 15 at the time, well, just turned 15. I was seeing what was happening, but I kind of literally had no voice. I had no way of voicing it because I couldn't vote. And so I saw it advertised on Facebook, and I kind of just said, let's give it a go, why not? And jumped the gun, and I did, and it ended up obviously paying off hugely because I met a network of incredible young people and managed to kind of utilise and help uplift this platform that young people have created. And I think in a sense you just have to go for it because there's so many adults, especially politicians on a global scale, telling you not to do something because either they're intimidated, they're scared that they'll have to do something because you're holding them to account. There's so many reasons that people will tell you not to do something. But you have to do it, and you have to believe that sort of your own motivations and what you see, like what you feel within you, you need to fight for. Go out and do it, and kind of plug into these networks on a local level, like the Bury Youth Climate Action group that I've got, and the youth strike groups that are always looking for volunteers. We can never have too many. But just getting in these networks, and I've never kind of been into an environment network that hasn't been welcoming because they're always looking for volunteers because we're all working for the same thing. Extinction Rebellion, Youth Strike Manchester, the two different groups, we go about doing things in different ways, but intrinsically we're all fighting for the same thing. And in a sense that allows for a lot of unity and it's a welcoming atmosphere, I would say, when I've been in it. And so you can't let those limitations hold you back, and it's just young people's voices are oppressed so often, and I think you kind of just have to go and give it your all and just give it a go. And that's basically all I can say.
You can't get a clearer encouragement than that. Emma, thank you very much indeed for your inspiration, and good luck in all your future work as well. Sarah has had to leave us. Professor Bridle has had to leave us now, but we still have Emma and Colin with us, just for a small handful, a tiny amount of questions, because things have been too interesting and things have overrun. I'm sorry. We had a question from a young participant aimed at Colin, just to about there was a question on educating people, young people in schools about climate. Which the questioner felt was perhaps a bit limited in the response, in that it's less about light bulbs and what about the educating young people about voice and the bigger things that they could do now and in the future. Sorry, Colin, you're still muted. It's one of those COVID phrases we always have.
I did imply that, and you said an invitation for an open door for young people to act, and our commissioners and others to be involved. That's one aspect of this. The schools themselves do have some internal democracy, although the last few months a lot of that has gone by the wayside. But that is another process that schools should be involved with. In terms of this is something that's been marginalised since the national curriculum was particularly coming in the last 6 years. Prior to that, there was a strong element on personal and social education, and one element of that was, of course, how individuals can participate in democracy. I think there are opportunities for those young people in our schools who wish to go forward on this, that we should be working and we should be creating structures within the schools that people can actually participate in the smaller elements, which doesn't sound much, but that is participation, and therefore is the development of a young people's voice. I think in Stockport we need to be widening that from outside the schools. We've started to do that, and as I said early last year, when there was the Make Your Voice Heard, climate was the biggest single issue. We've had those annual conferences, but they've got bigger and bigger, and they should be, and the votes have got bigger and bigger. And somebody was asking on the Q&As whether Stockport's got their own MYPs. Yes, there are two, and there's normally an election round about this time in the year to start it for a 2-year process. And usually the two runners-up are the kind of alternates. And the two that are just there now, I think they're both reaching the stage where they're ready to retire. So it's ready on that front, but it's the participation within schools, within the youth parliament that Stock itself has, which is still very tentative, but it should be much, much bigger than that.
Thank you.
But equally, it's got to start within our schools, that they actually have some form of democratic voice to enable our school students to express their views. From that then comes the idea of involvement.
Thank you. Colin, I wish we could, there's so much more to say here, but I really want to give the last words to our commissioners. So I'm just going to ask each commissioner to give us 30 seconds. What are you taking away from this event now? Hannah.
Yeah, I think this event has just, it's massively opened my eyes to all the different options that you can take yourself, especially looking at all these different people with jobs, and they're all in different parts of their lives, but still it's just showing how uniting this issue is and how everyone is coming together in order to get over it, and we need to get everyone else into that. I'm really interested in hoping that we can go on and get our local area some more groups that we can go out and do stuff, and just particularly bringing it into primary schools, and just I'm so optimistic about the future after speaking to all these people.
Fantastic. Hannah, thank you so much for joining in today. Willem, your 30-second take home from the event?
Very similar to Hannah, I'm feeling very hopeful about kind of what people have been just discussing about. It's been a while since I've been to an actual physical protest and sort of felt the buzz of kind of changes happening, but I kind of do really feel that now at the moment, and especially I feel very excited with what Colin's been outlining for like the local Stockport area, and it's really nice to get some more information on that, and also from Sarah and Andy about student-led sort of initiatives to kind of get more people moving and to get more people making a real difference. But yeah, it's been great. I've loved this event. It's been really exciting to be a part of.
Willem, thank you for all the time you put in as well. Thank you for your input. And last but by no means least, Connie, your takeaway from the event.
I really hope that we can, take away from this, that we can do more to in our local area in the Heatons to really get young people, interested in climate action and encourage them to do something with their voice.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Connie. My thanks on behalf of Sustainable Living in the Heatons to Connie, Willem, Hannah, to Emma Greenwood, Professor Sarah Bridle, Councillor Colin Foster, and that guy Burnham, Andy Burnham. Brilliant to have him on board as well. At 3 o'clock, there's going to be a fantastic session as part of the festival for about the facts, the science. Sarah McClelland and Andy Wilson, two very experienced carbon literacy trainers, are going to lay that all out for you. That's not to be missed. For more information about sustainable living in the Heatons and all the multiple things you can do to play your part in tackling the climate crisis, please go to www.slheatons.org. Thank you for viewing today, and do stay in touch. I hope it's inspired you, and thanks to everyone involved. I think we better say goodbye now. Ta-ta.